Hello and welcome to Quirky, your car brochure channel, and in today's episode we're going to be looking at the early Citroen Visa. Hello and welcome back, and if you're new to Quirky, we're a car brochure channel here on YouTube looking at car brochures from around the world for the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s and sometimes beyond that as well. So if you're interested in cars and car brochures, please consider subscribing. Anyway, back to today's episode. Yes, we're going to be looking at the Citroen Visa, and in particular we're going to be looking at the early Citroen Visas. Sort of like the pre-facelift. There was only really one generation of Visa really, but they did a bit of a facelift. These early ones, I kind of like to call them the pig nose because of the little nose on there, but we'll compare and contrast how they did change that on a later brochure. But we're going to concentrate on this brochure. It's a very early one for the Visa actually, for 1979 in the UK. So let's have a look at that now. And here is today's brochure. A lovely condition actually for the age. Incidentally, stickers now available in the shop, and you can actually become a member if you want to. We don't have many members at the moment, but when we get over 10 members or so, we'll start doing extra little videos for those members. But don't worry, Course Light will always be free, so the main content will be still there for everyone else to actually view it. But membership does help the channel, but even liking and subscribing helps the channel, so I appreciate whatever you do as a viewer, and thank you very much. Anyway, today's brochure, Citroen Visa, early ones. You can tell the early ones with this sort of like a bulbous nose. I kind of like call them the pig snout or pig nose Citroen Visa. I kind of prefer these. I don't know. They look even more basic and even more weird, so typically I quite like them. But let's throw a later brochure up just to see how it's different and how they changed them. So this is a later brochure. Actually, it's much later. This is 84 in UK. You can see it had more sort of like a flatter nose, a little bit more traditional, a little bit easier to live with than this ugly little guy here, I guess. But like I say, I do prefer these because they kind of look a little bit weird, even more Citroen-esque. But of course, the Citroen Visa, changing times and all that, it was really a Peugeot platform, the Peugeot 104 platform really. But certainly a very interesting car. My mum actually had a Citroen Visa. It was one of the later ones. It was a Citroen Visa GT, not the GTI, the GT. And this is the Citroen GT. With these unusual alloy wheels, which I always remember never seem to hold air for whatever reason, and they did change them. This is about 82, I think, this brochure. They changed the wheels to these sort of like alloys here. I don't know if it's because they gave trouble to everyone, but certainly my mum had all sorts of issues trying to seal those wheels on those alloys. But yeah, Citroen GT, I think that's a very rare one actually. Later on they had the GTI, of course, which everyone's heard of, but I think today the Citroen GT is probably even rarer because it was more of a sort of like a warm hatch that was really very much forgotten about, but still a world away from these very early Citroen Visas with their tiny engines. Felt more Citroen-esque, I think, with these tiny little engines in them. So let's concentrate on this brochure today, the very early one. So this particular brochure is actually dated November 79, so like a pretty early one for the UK. Citroen Visa was manufactured and marketed by Citroen between 1978 and 1988. Like I say, very much Peugeot based hatchback. From the 104, although it was a larger car than a 104. Facelift came in around about 1981 actually. It went for that more traditional flatter nose, and these early ones, which I like to call the pig nose, I think are pretty rare now, certainly in the UK anyway. Very basic sort of car overall, but let's actually open the brochure up and let's have a look inside and see exactly what you got. So as we open up, we get two nice examples of the Visa and a very wordy text, which we're certainly not going to read all of it, but let's just zoom into some of the text to show which models you got at this time. So the base model at this time was called the Visa Club. It had a twin cylinder air-cooled engine capable of 50 miles per gallon with ease. That means well over 400 miles on a full tank. Reassuring these days when petrol shortages seem to spring up overnight. Top speed 77 miles per hour. Visa Super, which is your other model, only two models at this time, the Club and the Super actually, had a 4-cylinder overhead camshaft water-cooled engine. Quick off the mark, but well able to achieve over 40 miles per gallon. Top speed 90 miles per hour. In addition, the Visa Super has protective side mouldings, halogen headlamps, a more luxurious interior, and to stiffen the suspension to cope with faster driving and rear anti-roll bar. Visa Club has a front anti-roll bar only. So they're not the clearest, but I'll zoom in a bit further in a moment. But these are the two models, both the Club and the Super. Let's have a look at the Club first. Really, to be honest with you, very difficult to actually tell the two apart. This is obviously the more basic one. It doesn't have the rubbing strips on the side, but it's still got these nice little chrome wheel caps in the centre there, and it's sort of body coloured underneath the bumper. And if we look at the higher spec model, the Super with the larger engine, it looks like it isn't body coloured underneath the bumper this time, but you can certainly make out these rubbing strips going down the doors. But overall, there's still two very basic looking cars. As we turn the page, we get a much nicer image of the Visa Super, and we'll certainly zoom in that in a moment. Text is a bit wordy, so we're not going to go through all of it, but interestingly at the top here it tells us the Citroen Visa has been designed as a spirited motor car to take its place in the Citroen range between the long-running 2CV and Diane and the GS series. And I do like the overall looks. I do like that front end. I think it makes it, I don't know, look a little bit more quirky, and I guess that's probably why they changed it, because people don't really want quirky cars. There were only really one generation of Visas in them 10 years, but like I say, they did change that front end and did a minor little bit of a change to the rear as well. But like I say, this is the higher model, the Super, so you can see those rubbing strips going down the side there. Single wiper, as of course is very typical with Citroen. As we turn the page, we get some nice sort of images of the engine and the interior, which we'll come back to. Again, it's super wordy, but we'll certainly have a look at the top here where it's talking about the two different engines. So it says engines. The Visa Club, like I say, the Club is the base model, is fitted with a new Citroen flat twin air-cooled engine with modified gearbox of the type designed for the heavier and faster Citroen GS. Consequently, the gearbox never gets close to its stress limits, so giving outstanding reliability and exceedingly long life. New feature is a light alloy 652cc. So yeah, that base Visa Club has just got a 652cc engine. I think that's the one I would have, if I could choose any Visa, I think I would like that very base model with the 652. Now the Super's a bit different. That's fitted with a 4-in-line cylinder water-cooled engine of 1124. So there's quite a big difference between the two models really. Glimpse on the inside and we get that very interesting interior. Yeah, it's an early Visa, it's got an interesting interior, but actually it was carried over to the later Visas as well. Even my mum's Visa GT had this unusual sort of left hand with all those gauges, very unusual. I also remember indicators were non-self cancelling. That was actually an intentional thing for Citroen to say, you know, you should be thinking about these things, so you should cancel it yourself. So that was quite intentional, but for the time it seemed very weird driving it with a non-self cancelling indicator. Overall, very unusual, very quirky interior. Typical for Citroens at the time. I mean, even like, you know, your GS and GSAs had these sort of like interiors and even the bigger Citroens. So it wasn't just the Visa that had this quirky interior. It was very much a Citroen thing. Everything close to hand, everything near your steering wheel. But when you first jump in them, certainly it takes you a little while just to remember where all the gauges are. But as soon as you've done it a few times, then it seems second nature, even though it looks very weird. Unlike cars like the GSI, it doesn't have that sort of revolving speedo and rev gauge on there, though. We've got a more traditional speedo, and in this case no rev counter, just a clock. And there is a little bit of image of that smaller Visa Club's engine, that 652cc engine. A close-up of that snout that they did actually change later on. And of course that larger engine for the Super with that 1124cc engine. So overall, even though Citroen was very much getting very heavily Peugeot influenced, and yeah, it was based on a Peugeot, of course, the Peugeot 104, it was still very Citroen-esque, wasn't it? Tiny little 652cc, that wacky interior still made you feel like it was very much a Citroen. And then we go to these centre pages, which I really love actually. This is the Super again, but what a great image. Look at that interior. Maybe we'll zoom in a little bit further. Those seats look lovely. You can see it's kind of like matched with that front dash there. Seem to remember lots of room for the front seats, lots of leg room. Bit more cramped in the back, I seem to remember though. So here we go. Now we come to a page entitled what you may be surprised to find in the Visa. Equipment levels. It's a bit wordy, but the images are interesting, so let's zoom in on those. So look then at the interior. Nice seats, aren't they? These are ones obviously the brown rather than the blue, I guess because of body colour. It's telling us the front seats recliner are upholstered in jersey cloth, which is nice for such a basic car. And then it gives you a little bit of a look at these ventilator vents. It tells us the demisters operated on the side windows. In all, there are 7 air vents ventilated in the passenger compartment with a special control for rear seat ventilation. Rear seat heating or ventilation. 2-speed blower allows the cool or hot air input to be adjusted at will. And then it gives a little bit of a look at the door and the door card with them sort of like door bins. Next shot is showing you the rear of the Visa, really showing you that rear wash wipe, but it does actually tell us, even though this is the highest spec model by the looks of it, it does tell us the rear window is electrically heated. The electric washer wiper is standard, so even that base model gets that, which is nice. A look at the reversing lights and fog lamps, and then the final image is a great shot of that interior. No radio by the looks of it, but it does tell us twin rear mounted speakers, roof aerial and electrically suppression are standard, so enabling you to fit radio or stereo cassette player at minimal cost. Interesting interior though, isn't it? That big windscreen and that single wiper. And then when we turn the page, we get a lovely little image of the base model, the Club, with that tiny little engine in there. I've just zoomed in on there just to give you a look at the wheels and them little centre caps, as well as that interesting bumper with that sort of energy absorbing sort of ripple in it. Also unusual placement of that indicator. Again, we can tell it's the base model without those rubbing strips on there. And then if we move down, we can look at the practicality of those 4 doors. A lot easier than getting in and out than squeezing into a 2-door car. And of course, this was a time when hatchbacks were all the thing, so the right car at the right time, really. Look at the single wiper, I guess, unusual little image. And then the final image there is looking at the luggage compartment. And of course, on the Visa, there isn't a spare wheel in there. The spare wheel was actually in the engine compartment, interestingly. And then we get to the back pages showing a little bit about, protecting against rust by dipping it there. I don't know how good the Visa were against rust resistance. And there's very interesting little images there. Citroen in the UK and these delivery trucks for Citroen. But then we turn to the back page. We have the specifications page. So let's have a look at that now. So like I say, two models. So the 652cc and the 1124cc. Two-cylinder on the 652, and that is air-cooled, compared to the four-cylinder on the Super, and that is water-cooled. So very different things on each one. Gives you a bit of information about the clutch and the transmission, which is front-wheel drive with obviously 4 synchromesh forward speeds, gear controlled by floor-mounted lever in centre console. Handbrake, I seem to feel, was actually on the front wheels, interestingly. So you have that sort of feel of your back going down when you did your handbrake. I think the GSA did the same sort of thing, actually. Going down to the suspension, independent on all 4 wheels, using coil springs, dampers, McPherson struts and anti-roll bars at front, trailing arms and coil springs at rear. Visa Super also fitted with the rear anti-roll bars. In a typical French and Citroen fashion, it was a very comfortable suspension for such a basic car. And then moving down the list, so the smaller engines are 36 bhp compared to 57 bhp of the larger engine. And then if we move down, we've got our dual circuit brakes with discs at the front, self-adjusting drums at the rear, kind of like what you would expect. It also gives the performance figures actually. So the top speed of that small engine is 77 miles per hour. Not too bad at all, a bit faster than your 2CV with the 602cc, although I think a lot of people did do 652s on, a little bit of an adjustment there to do a 652 on 2CVs as well. The larger engine, 89 miles per hour. A little bit of fuel consumption there, so at your constant 56 it was doing 48.7 for the small engine, for the larger engine 45.6. In the notes, so it just gives you the date there, the 1st of November 1979. Okay, and before I forget, I have found this price list. Now, this price list didn't actually come with this brochure, I just happened to have this price list, and it's a little bit later. Like I say, the brochure itself is November 79. This is September 80, so almost a year later, but it still gives you a nice idea of the prices for the Visa and how it fitted in. Okay, so the Citroen price list, this is saying it's for 15th of September 1980. Like I say, it's a bit later than brochure, but it still gives us an idea. Now, if you look there is the Visa Club and the Visa Super that we saw there. Looks like in the next year, the Visa Super E was also added there as well. But the Visa Club in the UK in 1980 will be £3,236 and change, and the Super will be £3,565 and change. Now, the thing I'd kind of like notice about this price list, if we look at the Diane, £2,668 and the 2CV £2,425. It's quite a big jump to a Visa, isn't it? Particularly when you think that Visa Club has only got that very small engine in there. I don't know, was it really worth moving up from a Diane to a Visa, or even a 2CV to a Visa? Seems quite a big jump, that, to me. And if we look down even further, we can also see that the GS is still there on the list. So the left over at the end of the GS and the GSA, the new models there as well. So if we wanted, so for example, a basic GSA, which would be the GSA Club, that was £4,349. So, you know, I can imagine why people would get a Visa from that, because that is quite a jump. But maybe the leftover GS is pretty cheap at £3,632. It might have been worth moving up even to the last of the GS models there. Now, I also have a price list for 1981, exactly a year later, and we can see there has been a few changes there. The 2CV has now got the Club and the Charleston, you know, the two coloured paint job. You've got the Diane still there, and then the new Visa range, because yes, this would have been the restyled Visa by this time. And you can see a much larger range: the Special, the Club, the Super E, the Super X, and the Super X 5-speed. But if you notice, the prices make more sense now. We've got that even more basic Visa Special, £2,820. Not a huge jump from the Diane, really, is it? So I think by 1981 the Visa range made more sense, and that's maybe why you can tend to see more of the newer styled Visas in the UK. I think the pig nose, the early ones, was a little bit expensive, really, particularly when you're looking at that small engine model. If we move down the list, we can see now the GSs have all been sold out, and you've just got these GSAs. So there we go, that is the Citroen Visa with price lists. Let me know what you think about the Citroen Visa. Did it make sense? And, you know, when was the last time you saw one? Thank you so much for watching Quarter Life today. As always, love your comments, so I will read every one of those. If you've not subscribed and liked, please do so. It really helps the channel. And of course, we can become a member as well, so look at that on the home page. We've also got a shop open, so there is various items if you want to have a look at that also. But most of all, thank you for watching today. Take care, all the best, and goodbye.